Let's look at Europe in detail. There have been over 65,000 COVID-19 deaths just in France, Italy and Spain. And while the situation remains urgent across the EU, daily death tolls and infection rates are stabilising and in some cases falling. And that means attention is increasingly turning to what the Italian government is calling lockdown 2. So let's start there. In Italy, it's recorded over 24,000 deaths and over 180,000 cases. And later this week, we expect the Italian Prime Minister to announce an easing of restrictions. Here's the BBC's Sara Mineta, who spent the last month working in Italy, running through the options that the Prime Minister has.
The main principle is that social distancing will be the new way of life for as long as it's needed until a new vaccine or a therapy is found. This means using the compulsory use, for instance, of face masks and gloves, but also, for instance, for companies to give flexible working hours in order to allow public transport not to be too crowded. Also, the government has said that they will increase investment in the health system, so they will create some hospitals that will specifically will be dedicated to the treatment of coronavirus patients in order to avoid the contamination of other patients that don't have coronavirus. And also testing. Currently, Italy does between 40 and 50,000 tests every day. The government said that they will continue doing that, and on top of that, they will also add antibody tests. And finally, contact tracing. This has been a very contentious issue. The government wants to introduce contact tracing through an app that can be downloaded on everybody's phone. But the Prime Minister today said that the use of this app will be on a voluntary basis because, of course, there are privacy issues with regard to this app. So these are the main guidelines that the government will need to implement in order to allow for some activities to restart. And the government will give more details on that later this week.
And already we've heard from the Italian Prime Minister, who's been pledging a new economic stimulus package to try and help the Italian economy recover.
In addition to the 25 billion euros that the government has already allocated with the so-called Cure Italy decree, the government is now requesting from the 2020 budget an additional 50 billion euros, which will be added to the 25 billion already allocated to make an overall intervention of no less than 75 billion euros.
It's not just about people's finances. Here's another hugely important issue. This is a headline in the website The Local. Italy considering psychological tests to judge how long people can stay at home. And we know from this article that a group of scientists is now lobbying the Italian government to assess the psychological toll of the lockdown and to factor that in to the policies that it sets. Well, here's Sara Mineta again on how Italians are faring as they go through this lockdown.
This week is the 7th week that most Italians have been in lockdown. The people in Lombardy have been in lockdown for even longer. And there are two feelings here. On the one hand, people are on their knees, many businesses are going under, many families are going hungry because they haven't gotten any income for the past 2 months now. So people are really struggling, so there is a will to go back to work. But at the same time, many people are developing a form of anxiety at the thought of going back into the streets. So right now with the lockdown, they feel safe, they see that it has been working. So they are scared that whenever the government decides to ease the restrictions, there might be a second outbreak of coronavirus, which nobody wants, of course.
Well, let's switch from Italy to Austria. Earlier in the week, we've been talking about how small shops in Germany had been allowed to reopen. Well, Austria is now following suit with some changes of its own. Here's Bethany Bell in Vienna.
Mr. Kurz says that if all goes well, restaurants and cafes will be allowed to reopen as of the 15th of May. Now, we don't know all the details about this yet. We don't know the social distancing rules that will be in place, how many guests will be allowed in, what the size of groups will be. Mr. Kurz says all of that detail will be announced next week. But it is expected that serving staff certainly will have to wear face masks. Mr. Kurz said Austria is moving more quickly, faster than other countries in returning to what he called a new normality. This was, he said, due to the fact that Austria took tough measures early on in the outbreak.
So it started in Italy and Austria, next to Spain and Germany. It might be a surprise to you that any major sporting or cultural events remain in the calendar for the next few months. Some are there, but 2 more have been cancelled. Oktoberfest in Munich, you'll all know about it, the world's biggest beer festival. It's off. Here's the BBC's correspondent in Germany, Jenny Hill.
We heard from the Bavarian regional prime minister announcing the cancellation, and he said this is an unbelievable shame. The authorities in Bavaria describe Oktoberfest as the biggest and most beautiful party in the world. If you've been, you may disagree with the last part of that description, but in all seriousness, this is huge, not just for Bavaria, but for Germany. A lot of tourists come to this event. 6 million people were expected in Munich for a few weeks that festival runs for this autumn. It brings in well over €1 billion to the local economy. So to have to cancel it is a massive deal, not just for the region, but for Germany too. And I suppose it's an indication, isn't it, that whilst we are seeing some elements of daily life coming back to normal, it is going to be a very long time before really German life, European life across the globe can go on as before.
So Oktoberfest is off, so is the running of the bulls in Pamplona. I'm sure you've seen these pictures over the years. This event takes place every July. It's an extraordinary one. Unfortunately, it's off this year. The mayoress said, although it was to be expected, it still makes us sad, which is an excellent summary, I'm sure, of how a lot of us have felt as plans have been cancelled. And frankly, they continue to be cancelled because this story continues to impact well into 2020. Today, the Netherlands has said today that large public gatherings will remain banned until September. Well, next we switch to Greece, to a town called Kranidi in the south of Greece. I want to show you these pictures which have come in from there. The town's been put into lockdown with a nighttime curfew after a virus outbreak in a local migrant hostel. The hostel houses around 500 people, mainly sub-Saharan Africans, and now has 150 people who have tested positive, though I should say none are showing symptoms. And of course this plays into broader concerns about the impact of the virus, what that it could have in the various overcrowded migrant camps in Greece. One other thing to show you, this is the European Parliament's website. It's looking ahead to an EU leaders summit that starts on Thursday, all done by video as you'd expect. The background to this is that Emmanuel Macron has already warned that the EU could collapse if it doesn't act collectively to rebuild Europe's economy. But since this crisis started, the EU's 27 members have looked very much like, well, 27 countries. So on Thursday, they'll face yet more fundamental questions about whether they can act as one, or indeed whether they want to. What we can be more sure of is that they are all making plans for easing the lockdown, and that however those plans turn out, as Angela Merkel was reminding us this week, this is not going to be getting back to normal anytime soon.